Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz Koch. I'm the producer of the Brooklyn Book Festival. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. We were overly thrilled with how the weather turned out today, considering all things considered. Just wanted to welcome you and also to say we are a free festival now for 18 years. We've been here in downtown Brooklyn that whole time, but we are actually we actually just had a whole week of bookend events that took place all over the city. Many of them were free as well. We had a free virtual festival day and a free children's day yesterday. So the reason I'm emphasizing free repeatedly is as a nonprofit, the way we often get some of our support is through t-shirt sales, through donations from individuals. So if you're enjoying your day, consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival or buy a t-shirt for your best friend or your lover or whoever in your life might want a t-shirt. And know that's all going for a good cause. I'm now thrilled to introduce Colson Whitehead and Dwyer Murphy, who are going to have this fantastic discussion together. Everyone, enjoy your day and spend the whole day here.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming out today. It really is such a beautiful day. I'm Dwyer Murphy. This is Colson Whitehead, and I want to inform everybody that after the event, our books will be on sale in the back of the church, and you can have them signed. So they're being offered by the Center for Fiction, which is a great institution here in Brooklyn now. I presume many of you are familiar with it, but they're just wonderful. And thank you to everybody from the festival for such a beautiful day. This is great. So I'm aware that this event, I want to tell everybody, I'm very conscious of the fact this has been billed as an intimate conversation. And I've been thinking a lot about how we make this intimate, how we make this a little special. So first, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask Colson because honestly, we're both authors, we have books here, but I am taking this opportunity to just pry into everything Colson is doing, and that's how we're going to conduct this event. So I hope you'll all bear with me as we just interrogate Colson together. And I was hoping that maybe you could read a little something to kick us off. Colson doesn't need so much introduction, perhaps, as some other authors, but obviously is a two-time Pulitzer winner and the author of many fabulous novels, and most recently, it's Crook Manifesto, which is kind of probably most of you know it, but it's a crooked retelling of modern New York history, and so we get the privilege of being here at the Brooklyn Book Festival with him, and I'm going to begin by asking you to read a little something for us.
Yeah, thanks so much. We've talked before, and so it was a great pleasure, and it's always nice to be part of the Brooklyn Book Festival. I can't believe it's been 18 years, which seems pretty horrifying, but I'm glad that it's still thriving, and we're all still here, I guess. So I'm going to read a bit from Crook Manifesto, a brief bit, and this section stars the character named Pepper. Pepper was a supporting player in Harlem Shuffle, and in here he gets his own caper. You know, the two books are divided into three sections, three different sort of robberies, capers. And in this section, Pepper becomes an unlikely private investigator, and he needs information from a drug dealer named Quincy Black. And so a Richard Pryor type comedian in the early 70s, Roscoe Pope, is giving him entry to this drug dealer's townhouse. Quincy Black opened the door, decked out in brown corduroy trousers and a white silk shirt embroidered with tiger heads. He was younger than Pepper had imagined, slim and long-limbed, with the plucked eyebrows and a pencil mustache of a B-movie villain. He gushed, "Roscoe, you look great. Congratulations." Pope smiled. "For what?" "For all of it, brother, all of it." Pepper and Pope stepped into the vestibule. Quincy gave Pepper a once-over. "I'm Pepper." "Good to meet you, brother." Quincy pointed to the low bamboo rack by the foot of the stairwell. "They go there." Pope was acquainted with the house rules and bent down to take off his sneakers. He signaled for Pepper to join him. Yet Pepper did not remove his shoes. He was thinking about the patches of light on the polished banisters, the freshly vacuumed hallway runner, staff. How many people did Quincy Black employ to keep up the place, and where were they now? Quincy looked at Pepper's black shoes and said, "Thanks, brother," as if Pepper had heeded his request, which he had not. Quincy added, "In Oriental cultures, it's part of the agreement between host and guest." Yet Pepper did not remove his shoes. A large man emerged from the back of the townhouse, tiny-headed and round-bellied like a 10-pin, lumbering from the kitchen. He wiped his left hand on his yellow apron and peered down the hall at them, taking the measure of the situation. His other hand held a butcher knife. Cartoon salt and pepper shakers cavorted on the body of the apron. Yet Pepper did not remove his shoes. It was not Pepper's intention to be difficult. It was a matter of personal principle. Socks were holy. To straights and squares, the criminal world was defined by chaotic forces, the violent and the unruly, the reprehensible and the forbidden. But Pepper governed his own little corner through iron rules and logic, and if asked to explain his system, don't work with dope heads, never knock over a bank on a Tuesday, he could do so, though no one ever asked. His disproportionate affection for socks, however, was idiosyncratic and belonged to the realm of the unsayable, like the formula of love or the final name of God. His appreciation took root in the freezing Newark mornings of his childhood. Cotton swallowed around his feet, no matter how threadbare, allowed him to face the mirthless cold. In the Pacific Theater during the war, he came to respect and revere fresh, dry pears as a ward against trench foot, parasites, myriad fungal depredations. The first thing he did when he got back to the Green Valley Motor Lodge after the botched McCarran job was to peel off his blood-soaked footwear. He didn't feel human again until he put on a new pair of cotton poly socks. People were often disappointing. A fine pair of socks, seldom so. They were not to be displayed casually at a stranger's demand. He slept in them, only took them off to bathe or make love, although on 2 occasions they had been cut off by emergency room personnel while he lay unconscious. At this moment he was not making love, and the highlight of his day so far had been a long, hot shower. No, he could not stoop or bend in the front hallway of Quincy Black's townhouse. It was impossible.
Wait, so why don't you knock over a bank on a Tuesday?
Gotta have rules. I mean, the title is a Crook Manifesto, and so, in different sections, I'm exploring what different crooks will and will not do. Pepper, for example, has no problem maiming or manhandling or killing somebody, but he would never, say, torch a townhouse with people inside, as happens later in the book. And so, I guess I'm interested in the kind of anthropology of what people will and will not do, and apparently you don't knock over a bank on a Tuesday.
So is it superstition or there's not enough money there? I would have assumed it had something to do with the flow of money.
Superstition and something that I will not explain.
Okay, that's much better. That's much better. So I'm sort of curious about the thing that you choose to read here. So Pepper is a very specific character within these books, and he sort of gets his own novella, as you mentioned, in the middle of this. But why do you choose to read from his perspective? Because this trilogy has a sort of protagonist, Ray Carney. Is it more fun? Do you have more fun with Pepper or certain characters and you gravitate towards them?
Definitely, as the canvas gets bigger and, say, Pepper, our supporting character, gets his own caper, there's room to explore different parts of the world and also different kinds of humor. And Pepper, with his blank affect and slightly sociopathic demeanor, is a good foil for humor, for people like Roscoe Pope, for Carney. Most of us are not criminals. I mean, I assume a certain percentage of the people in this room are criminals. But for most of us, we're getting a lesson in how the crime world works through people like Pepper. So there's that. And then in terms of picking that section, my first book tour, I'd never read in front of an audience before, and my hands just like shook, and I was furiously sweating, and I would mispronounce big words I'd only seen in books and never pronounced before. And so then, since then, having to do stuff in public, I pick things that remind me of the process of writing. And it was a fun day writing Roscoe Pope and inhabiting Richard Pryor. It was a fun day to think of weird moments where pepper can be pepper. Yeah. And so I pick sections that, for me, bring back the drudgery of talking about the book in interviews, on TV, and traveling, and playing, stuff like that. I like the events at night, and I like to recall the process of the fun parts of writing the book.
You said in an offhand manner that nobody here is a criminal, probably, and I'm curious because my last book involves some spies and some espionage in a tangential way, and at some of the events that I was doing, people would come up to me afterwards and tell me that they had been involved in the world of espionage, and I had some cards slipped to me, and it's sort of off-putting that one of them I saw a couple of guys wearing black suits in the back, and then they just sort of disappeared afterwards. And I want to know if you have had, I assume that maybe no fences have come up to you and told you that's not how it is, but I wonder if you're getting, especially from a New York crowd, maybe if you've been getting any feedback about your vision of New York in this world, or the criminal sort of underbelly you've imagined.
No criminal has announced themselves to me and said, I used to, I killed a man. You totally got it wrong when you describe it here. And I'm used to that. I wrote a book about elevator inspectors, and people will say, oh, I gave your book to the elevator guy in my building. But they never have the second part of the story. It's just like they gave it to him, and I never find out what happened. I've never met an elevator inspector. I never met a zombie sweeper, the protagonist of Zone 1. I think part of it is like my demeanor. People don't like talking to me. I think people don't unburden themselves. I don't seem like a kind of a confidant. And definitely if you've killed some people, I'm not the person you want to come to.
I actually have that as a question I wanted to ask you. I wrote it down, I swear. So people don't come to you for if they've killed someone or if they need to bury a body. You don't think that you'd fit into their mind would never go to Colson Whitehead to help in getting away with it?
No, I hope there's a bar like in my book, like Donegal's, where medium level criminals go, maybe a little bit over the hill. No one else understands them, but there's a place like Cheers, Donegal's, where they can go and they can talk about all the times they failed and almost pulled it off and changed their lives, but it didn't work out. And then for me, inhabiting these people is fun. I have to get into character, and I think I like protagonists with weird jobs, elevator inspectors or fences. And definitely, since I'm still working on the third book, I'm still in the world, I am in character. So if I'm on the highway, I'm like, oh, you could dump a body there, it's totally great. You get off the next exit, and you go circle back, you dump the body, you get back, and you're on your way back to New York in 5 minutes. I pass the stoop and there's like a bunch of newspapers, it's an obvious tell that people aren't home inside. So I feel I get into character, and then once the book is over, I definitely get back to real life.
But that's part of the fun, right? I think especially New York is a city that's particularly well suited to it, but when you're writing a crime novel that is set in New York, you can walk around and imagine all of the corruption and the fronts and the things that are happening in the back rooms. And it's a really cool way to experience the city, to walk around imagining crimes that might be happening.
Well, there's the secret criminal cell for the city, and then just the great history of 200 years. Who was Hoyt, Skirmahorn? Who are all these people who got their names on these streets? We don't think about them, but they're part of our landscape. And so even if it's not some illicit activity, New York is so full of lives and all these generations replacing each other that there are so many hidden stories, and we're part of it. We're all part of it.
I wanted to ask you a little about Ray Carney and the first moment that he kind of arrived to you as a character. Do you remember when he sort of materialized in your imagination?
I think, I often start with a proposition, what if I updated the industrial age myth of John Henry for the information age? And there's no characters there's no situation. Then I'm like, where does it take place? When does it take place? And so with this one, I wanted to write a heist novel. I liked heist movies. For me, it's mostly a film genre. And I was like, can I do that? So I gave myself permission. And it started very practically. Like, I'd written 2 books in the South, Underground Railroad and Nickel Boys, and I was like, forget that. I don't want to talk about the South anymore. I'm gonna get back to New York. It's gonna take place in the past, because I've written a lot about the present, but I don't want to do that much research. I'm kind of burnt out. So after World War II, and then who's the main character? And before there's his personality, there's his function. Who in the crew can he be? And I didn't want him to be the wheelman or the brains. I kept thinking about that character in heist movies, The Fence. Our heroes will steal $2 million in gems. Half the crew is dead. They're crawling. They're bloody. They've been shot up, and they go to the fence, and the fence is like, "I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar," and I have to do all that work. And I was like, I hate the fence. I always hate the fence. Maybe you should be the hero, which I do a lot. Like Sag Harbor is about teenagers, and I hated being a teenager. I didn't like reading about teenagers. I don't even like teenagers. Why not write a book about teenagers? So that became Sag Harbor and this book. And then he's a fence. I did some research. A lot of fences will have a real storefront selling shoes or electronics, and in the back is where they do other illicit business. And to me, that suggested that psychology of the divided self. He wants to be an upstanding member of the community. He wants to have this family. He wants to go straight. But there is that dark part of his personality sort of always talking to him. And so it's not even like, I want to write about a man who's divided. It's just like solving a problem when. Who's the main character? He does this. And then how do I make it real? And as I make it real, if he has a storefront, what is it? It's home furnishings, why not? And then you get into the whole thing about class, because home furnishings are very aspirational. You're a young couple, you have a kid on the way, and your idea of what you're buying, what is possible for yourself is changing. So it's really about class. And so just finding a job for him, I've painted out a little bit of the world, and then to make it real, I have to invent furniture. I have to invent his sales pitch. And so I always feel like I'm solving a problem, and then another problem presents itself, and then suddenly you have a world.
When you were zeroing in on Harlem beginning in the 60s, did you think about, because New York has this incredible literary tradition, obviously, did you feel like certain eras or neighborhoods belonged to other writers? Was there any of that? Did you feel like you needed to avoid a certain period because another writer had already kind of made it?
I think the main thing was, when I was trying to think of moments in time for Harlem Shuffle, I thought my criminals would use a big event in New York history as cover, and so the blackout of '77 was a great opportunity, but it seemed kind of obvious. Then I thought one of the big riots, and Ralph Ellison owns the 1944 anti-police riot, so I couldn't use that, and that's more respectful, not like, also, it's Ralph Ellison. And so, but I've written about New York a lot, and definitely when I started writing about New York, I would get worried, how do I compete with E.B. White, who I don't even like, but people like him? So, or how do I compete with Paul Auster, who I do like, and he has this real sense of Brooklyn. And I think no matter what you're writing, you can't compete with all these other people. You can't I wrote about slavery, I can't compete with Toni Morrison. If you write about war, you can't compete with Homer. So we're all just like trying to do our business as writers in the early part of the 20th century, first century. We have to trust that we have our own uniqueness and distinctive point of view, because people who are much smarter and more talented have already done it. And maybe it's Toni Morrison or Donald Westlake or James Ellroy. So all we can do is trust in our own distinctiveness, that I'll make my own weird Harlem for Ray Carney. And if I do it right, it will be new, because I'm putting the effort in.
You mentioned there's some authors that I assume you're kind of in conversation with, maybe in some of these. But you'd mentioned movies before too, and it seemed like for this book, these books in particular, movies are a huge part of the influence. I think the last time we talked a lot about Sidney Lumet, and you said that kind of Serpico, watching Serpico, or that had been part of the germ of this. But then I was thinking about that era and some of the filmmakers who worked in New York, and the Lumet movies always feel to me like the corruption is a story, a tragic figure operating within that corrupt system. And Ray Carney, he's not tragic in that sense. He's kind of having a good time with some of it. I think like giving in to some of his baser impulses, but it reminded me almost more of like a Friedkin movie where these people are operating within a corrupt world, but kind of enjoying some of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, everybody is really corrupt in these books, except for Carney's wife Elizabeth and his kids, so far anyway. And definitely I remember talking to you and having this epiphany. Actually, I really am writing about Sidney Lumet, you know, in his 70s movies. And it's not just Serpico. If you've read Crook Manifesto, you know that the NAP Commission, the Anti-Police Corruption Commission, is part of the story. And that's, you know, the subject of Serpico, Sidney Lumet. But, you know, growing up, I was like kind of a weird shut-in, and I would watch like matinees on Channel 5 and Channel 9 and Channel 11. And it was The Taking of Pelham 123, but also Dog Day Afternoon, another Sidney Lumet film, and Network, which is on HBO like in 78, 79. And all those three books are about, these movies are about different kinds of corrupt systems and people being sort of trapped by them. And in Network, it's mass media and capitalism. And in Dog Day Afternoon, it's the federal government. And, you know, these two hapless crime guys trying to find their way in the world and have no idea how ruthless the forces are arrayed against them. And then Serpico, you know, honest guy against the corrupt system. And I think one of the great things about loving pop culture is that, you know, you soak all these different things in. And so I didn't realize that how many lessons I absorbed from Sidney Lumet, but it's definitely in there. And I think in this, his New Yorkiness and also his critique of power, you know, I think those are, you know, they come up a lot in these books.
I wondered, I think you had mentioned that you, when you've written about a topic or a subject, after you're done with it, it's very hard for you to enjoy that thing again or dive into it. And I wondered if these books have ruined anything for you about New York, or if you're feeling like you need to step away from certain things.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
of this.
I wrote a book about poker, and I was, you know, after thinking about it for a year and a half, I was like, I'm done with poker. I wrote an essay about fried chicken. And I used to make fried chicken like twice a month. It was great. It was a great ritual. And it was Southern fried. It was Korean, Japanese. I was always mixing it up. Then I wrote this essay about fried chicken, and now I'm like, haven't cooked in 3 years. You know, my love for New York has only grown, which is good because I live here, and so I would hate to have to leave. But I think writing this book, especially during the pandemic, in that first year when everything was locked down, and I would walk through Harlem doing research, and it kept me sane. And I think chronicling, you know, it's about one guy's life over 30 years. It's a trilogy. And we see him in the 60s in the Harlem Shuffle, and then in the 70s, and I'm working on him in the 80s, and he's having his ups and downs. And at the same time, New York is also very much a character, which is a cliche I hate. Cliche when people are like, the city's almost a character, like Dublin in Ulysses by James Joyce, it's almost a character. But halfway through Harlem Shuffle, I was like, damn it, New York is a character.
So what does that mean when New York is? Because let's go past that cliche. What do you think it means?
It's our mom, our dad, our antagonist, our home. You know, it's changing and going through its own weird thing the same way we are. So Ray Carney's having these changes, and also New York is having its reversals of fortune and its rebirth. And so Harlem Shuffle opens up in Radio Row, which is a neighborhood in Tribeca, which was razed to make the World Trade Center. And that book ends with the World Trade Center being built. And we know from our vantage that those buildings that are going up will come down again, and something else will take its place. The 70s, the economy is terrible in New York. Crime is at an all-time high, and then we come out of it in the early 80s, and Wall Street's booming again. There's all this new development, tax breaks for developers. But at the end of the 80s, we're back with another recession and the Wall Street crash and the height of the crack epidemic and the AIDS epidemic. And so in all of our lives, we're navigating our own reversals of misfortune and rebirths, and how do we tackle everything that's coming at us. And so is the city. And I think when you step back, it is very beautiful, you know, to me anyway, just to see freaking Court Street and its manifestations. I used to be down here all the time because my kid was at school around here. And in my own boring way, I'm always like, oh, that used to be that, and now it's that, and, you know.
That was the conversation we just had backstage.
Yeah, it's just this complete wonder. I'm so boring, but I really feel, you know, that ebb and flow of energy, and I feel so. No, I love New York more than ever, and hopefully, when I finish the last page, I will still feel that.
Well, where is your? Because I think everybody who lives in New York, they do go through transformations and periods of their relationship to the city. Where are you at now? What's your? How do you react to the city, and where do you feel like your lifespan here? I was a longtime New Yorker, and I recently left sort of by accident, and then it stuck, and I'm feeling horrible and guilty about that decision when I'm here. But it's a new phase in my relationship with New York. But where are you at with the city?
I think there's always just more New York. I mean, I think. I feel like if you go 5 blocks in any direction, you can find another New York. You can live someplace all your life and then just head off 10 minutes in a different direction, and there are different shadows, different buildings, different stories, and you can find yourself in a completely new city. And, you know, I wouldn't say Murray Hill or Turtle Bay are the most sexiest neighborhoods in the city, but I'm in a taxi cab, I'm like, I could live there. I could totally live there, you know, like those white brick buildings from the 60s with the little terraces. I love those. I'm sure there's a nice shoe shop and dry cleaners I can find. And so, I mean, not Staten Island, you know, no offense. But mostly it's my fault. I have not spent a lot of time there. I'm sure it's actually a fault of mine. And so, I still feel like I'm always moving every couple of years because I feel like there's more neighborhoods to be in and experience, and it gets expensive and tedious. But you know, I'm still like in a very lovely place with my hometown.
I want to talk about heists a little bit, because in the first novel you had this really beautiful, intricate heist sequence, and I wondered where that came into the writing process. It felt to me like something that you had been wanting to do for a long time, write a heist. And there is, now that you've described some of your writing process, I see how it's challenge-oriented, and you maybe worked it out bit by bit of how might this heist have actually carried out. But was that a long-time interest of yours?
Well, I think just loving, you know, a certain kind of low-budget crime novel where the people are desperate and dirty and look like Walter Matthau. And then one day saying, oh, actually, I can do that. You know, the same way I loved horror movies and Night of the Living Dead, and one day I was like, oh, actually, I can do a zombie novel, why not? I mean, there's no rules. And so, but you want to, like, be in the tradition, but also make it your own. And I think if I'm going to write a heist novel, I should probably have a proper heist. And that's only the real sort of big heist in those first 2 books. You know, after that, once I sort of get it out of the way on page 50 in the first book, I can concentrate on Ray and Pepper and everybody else and different kinds of crimes. But you want to do is sort of write and show people you know what you're doing, and prove to yourself you know what you're doing, you know. And so now that I'm in the 3rd book, and I am sort of doing a sort of more longer, like a longer heist again. It's like, now it's closure. It's like, now we're coming down, and I want to wrap things up, and so there's another heist that is sort of well detailed. But I'm just really eager to get to how Carney reacts to it and how Pepper reacts, and all those set pieces, whether it's, I shouldn't say set pieces, but sort of big moments of action, like the heist in this movie, in this book, or the abuse scene in Nickel Boys. Like, I have to show the main character having a terrible time, but I really want to get to the page after that when he hangs out with Turner, and that when the boys meet in the hospital, that's when the story really starts. And so these things have to be there because I am, trying to be part of the genre, but also I'm trying to get to my own thing. And so, yeah.
And do you? It feels to me like there is always this sense of fun in your novels, even when you are describing something that, like a heist or something, an intricate heist. We as the reader, I think, can tell that you're having some fun with it. So I assume that there is that problem-solving aspect to it, that you enjoy trying to do this. Do you feel like, are you tempted to try out your skills in the real world, not a bank or something like that, but a church or any? Have you thought about, that we could do this after the event?
It'd be great if I could just barely leave my house, frankly. I'm such a lazy bastard. So it's like a big effort to come out tonight, and I'm glad I did it. But no, I'm too lazy, and most days my maximum speed is lying in the house, depressed, looking at the ceiling. So.
Does anyone here know how to crack a safe? Do we have any safe crackers here? No? All right. If you do, just come up to us afterwards and let us know, because he's being coy here, but we're gonna steal something today. Can you tell me a little bit about your writing process? Just when we get into craft of whether it's heisting or writing, I like to know a little bit about other writers' routines. It helps me feel like I'm not crazy sometimes to just hear some of the superstitions and rituals, how you get through the day.
No, I mean, I'm definitely a home writer, and there's some people who go to cafes. You can't break down weeping in cafes; it's sort of frowned upon. You can't just lay down, for an hour after writing a page. So I like to work at home, write a page, take a nap, write a page, make a sandwich.
Do you really take a nap? Sometimes? I don't know. I know in the first novel there's this stuff about, a second sleep and sleep structures. So
no,
I'm
like during
curious.
a pandemic, and I was locked up with my family, or they were locked up with me, as always. They're like, "Daddy, why are you lying in the dark?" I was like, "This is what I do. It's my process. I'm just lying in the dark,
I'm an
thinking
artist.
of weird shit, and then I'm gonna go out and put it on a computer." So yes, lying down, being prone is always good. Some people say write every day, which seems like a big imposition on my lifestyle. But I like to write 8 pages a week. For me, that makes sense. It's an accumulation. It can be Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday, I have a dentist appointment. And I'm like, no, the whole day is shot. Or Thursday, my son has a fever, and we're just watching cartoons. So that means Saturday and Sunday. So, but just, 8 pages a week, maybe one page on Wednesday, and then 3 on Saturday. It adds up. And after a month, that's like 30-something, and after 10 months, that's like 300. That seems like a nice accumulation.
Are you going back day to day when you say or week to week? I guess then, if you have to get 8 pages, are you working on things that you've already written?
Some days I'm not feeling it, so I'm revising, and I'm always going forward and back and forward and back. And so, if I start something, I'll write pages 1 through 8, and then revise like 2 through 5, and then write 9 and 10, and then revise 1 through 6. And so there's some people who are like, "Oh, I wrote 36 drafts of this novel." I've never understood that, because I'm always like stopping and going back. And so if I discover something like definitely plot oriented, like on page 100, I'm like, wait, what if the butler did it? I don't keep going. I go back to like the first appearance of the butler on page 2. I'm like, and he twirled his mustache, evilly,
Will you really plow ahead with something like a major sort of plot point like that, where you've solved it, but you're not going to go back and
It rarely
address
happens
it?
that there's something huge that I would go back and change. I'm a big outliner, and definitely I think with a plot-heavy book, it's good to plot a lot, but also you have to be open to the process. And so with Underground Railroad, I had it sort of plotted. I had these different states, and I had their character, and then once I started writing, if you remember, if you've read it, there are short biographical chapters where I'll have like the doctor or Cora, the main character's mother, and it's like 5 pages from their point of view. And so that happened organically. It was outside my planning, but allowed us to see different parts of the world that the main character couldn't see. And then once I decided to have, like, say, Cora's mother in there, it changed a lot of stuff emotionally from where that section was placed. And I think, you know, if you're a plotter and a planner, you can see that if I put this scene with the mother early on, it has one effect on Cora. In the middle, a different effect on how we feel about Cora in the world, and towards the end, a different effect. And so there's a lot of plotting and planning, and also allowing the story to change organically.
Do you have any physical aspects to the writing day? I like to go for a run when I'm done writing. That's how I know I'm done. But I talked to another writer who he rings a bell at the end of the day. He's got like an old ship bell, and when he reaches his whatever he's done with the day, he just rings the bell. And I thought that's the most satisfying thing I've ever encountered. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, not that much closure. I mean, I sort of know when I'm done, and then my dream sort of process is to not have any, just to be at home for like 3 months straight, and I'm not teaching, I'm not traveling. I can just get up when I want to get up, and then write 1 to 3 pages a day. With the pandemic, I'd usually be done by 3 or 4, but with the pandemic, I couldn't go anywhere, so I had like a second shift, which is why I finished like Harlem Shuffle and Crook so close to each other, because I finished Harlem Shuffle and I was like, well, nothing else to do, so.
Tell me about the final, I assume it's going to be the final novel in the trilogy, and what it means so each of these novels is following a decade in New York City history, the 60s, the 70s, and now the 80s. So what does it mean to immerse yourself in 1980s New York City right now?
Well, it's close. I mean, I was alive in the 80s as opposed to like 65, but Carney was not necessarily going to like CBGBs to see like Sonic Youth in 85. So there's not a lot, I can't really get him into my experience. But I remember coming out of 1970s dirt and then into the sort of rebuilding of New York in the early 80s, and a new style of building, a cleaner building, and so I can call that. But it really is doing research, I mean, because I don't overlap so much with Carney and Pepper. But that means I do get to find different corners of New York history I was not familiar with, whether it was the Knapp Commission or what was happening in 1976, Crook Manifesto. The final section takes place in the bicentennial, so going back to that and researching that has been really rewarding. So I have a few, Koch-era scandals and things I'm itching to get to. But I remember like headlines, like I can see like a New York Post headline, and then actually going back as a grown-up and seeing what these different scandals meant and how they played out has been cool.
Do you feel like you can be free with some of the very specific details of events? Like I was just remembering that my first novel had built up between sort of the development of the Williamsburg waterfront and into 2006, and I really wanted the characters to go to the film forum and see Melville's Army of Shadows, and we had to rework the entire plot of the book to make sure that they could have actually gone to see, Army of Shadows that week at the film forum, and which seems in retrospect like a lunatic exercise to have done. But I wanted to know if in the 80s, are there certain events that you're kind of working around in the 80s that have really captured your imagination here?
Well, I don't want to go into it, but I'll use an example from Crook Manifesto where I am bending things. And is it likely that Pepper would hang out with a Richard Pryor type comedian? Maybe not. Is it possible he'd be hired as security for a film shoot in Harlem? That seems more plausible. And so bending things so I can get my own preoccupations. I wanted to write about blaxploitation because that was important for me as a teenager, as a kid growing up. And then also I'm writing a crime novel, and so that interplay between real and the fake was interesting to me. And so there's a blaxploitation film being shot in Harlem and Crook Manifesto, and that allows me to get my pop culture in. And if I'm doing it right, critics aren't saying, Colson Whitehead just wanted to write about blaxploitation and wedge it in there. It works because when we see Pepper interacting with these people, it's earning its space.
Would you read us a little something more?
Yes, I'd love to. So this is the first 2 pages of the 3rd Ray Carney book.
That's what I was hoping you would read. But so now we're all going to get a preview of the new book. This is exciting.
And it's 1981. Ed Koch is the mayor. And he used to say, like, how am I doing? So if you remember, we're coming out of the fiscal crisis, and this is where we are. And Ray Carney does not die at the end of the 2nd book. Spoiler alert, he's still alive in the 3rd one. In all of Ray Carney's years as a fence, he'd been a reluctant fence and a ruthless fence, at times harried and imperiled by his choices, and at others the embodiment of crooked intelligence. There was only one occasion when he participated in the theft itself, and that was in the summer of 1981 when Uncle Rich came back to town, that bad news time. The city that year was true to its personality, as malformed across the centuries, a monstrous entity powered by innate miseries, operated by brute will, and held together by pluck, fury, and rebar. It had been flat broke, and now clambered determinedly from the crater of debt, one mucky handhold at a time. Crime and its ingenuity devised new permutations daily, making every citizen a victim or a witness. New arrivals poured in hourly, as if there was room, multiplying the local varieties of sadness and perseverance, and outnumbering those who'd scurried to the suburbs or fled their last humiliation. It was dirty and sick and plain-spoken in its threats. "How am I doing?" the mayor asked on his rounds, barking like one of the mangy seals installed at the decrepit and neglected Central Park Zoo, a real dump. It was his trademark. Everybody needs a gimmick. How am I doing? The same as everyone else, tired, banged up, but staggering forth somehow. As for Ray Carney, he was a son of his city, enduring his ration of misfortunes and managing to engineer a few reversals. The day the Uncle Rich mess came to a head, Tuesday, the 16th of June, was already out of the ordinary in that Carney had a notable appointment. An interview with Sterling Quality, the monthly magazine of the Sterling Furniture Company. Carney had sold their furniture since he first opened his doors, to budget-conscious Harlemites of contemporary sensibility and taste, to bright-eyed couples who strained cheerfully under the monthly payments, to geezers who set themselves adrift in living rooms on new recliners. Now, the company had chosen him as Northeast Regional Dealer of the Month, August. Carney jumped up and almost knocked over his coffee when he got the call. Across a lifetime, a man cultivates a number of secret wishes that he dare not share with the world, precious things too delicate to exist outside the safe pastures of his mind. To see his name flow and curl in the dignified typeface of the Sterling Furniture House magazine? It was a dream he'd held close for decades. He and Elizabeth celebrated with a dinner at this French joint off Lex, where 2 tiny portions coiled on the big plates in insolent triumph.
I love trade magazines. People should work them into fiction anytime they get a chance, I think. Yeah. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions here, and I've had the chance to interrogate Colson. So if anybody else would like to, I think we have a mechanism for doing this somehow, right? Anyone want to? You could either ask a question or take communion. We offer both here. All right. Which one did you want? Question or communion?
Question today.
All right, go ahead.
Colson, you mentioned earlier about adopting the conventions of the genre writing in and adopting that convention, but then also kind of pushing back on it a little bit to make it your own. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about your experience in adopting the genre's style, and then what that was like in taking on like a crime style or a heist style, and then like making your own with it?
Sure, yeah, no, thanks for the question. There's a convention where a criminal wants to go straight, but he's pulled in for one last job. Just when he thinks he gets out, he's pulled back in. So Ray Carney has quit being a fence, and he gets pulled back in because he wants to get Jackson 5 tickets for his daughter. So that's jokey, but also hewing to the convention. I'm making my own, and for me, that's really hilarious. But also, there's that tradition. In terms of style, you know, I mean, I love the staccato, hard-boiled diction in film noir and also the novels, and so find my own way of navigating the slang of the 50s and 60s and then adapting it for the 70s and 80s. You know, that was definitely fun. I want to be able to have my kind of sentences which are imagistic and yet also concrete, and I think that actually is in the hard-boiled tradition. You get a lot of interesting collisions between the terse diction of the criminal world, but also these kind of insightful phrases and turns of phrase that are really startling. So find my own way into that tradition of keeping it clipped, keeping it direct, but also being able to have some cultural anthropology, also have some jokes, is I think the challenge, you know, in every book. What's the style, what's the tone of the book, and how can I find my way into it, at once saluting this kind of story that I'm coming in, that I'm entering from the outside, and also making it my own, if that makes sense.
Any other questions? Anybody want to come up?
Someone right here? Yeah. Thanks.
The pews are great here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a mother of young children and also a teacher educator. So what suggestions do you have for teachers of young children for writing?
Well, I loved, you know, my son's in 4th grade, and he had to read Charlotte's Web, and he was reading more, you know, faster than the rest of the class because he just loved it. And I was like, yes, that's the way you do it. You just keep reading. And so I think I tell writing students, read, read, and read to find out what kind of writer you want to be. You know, if you read The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, read more Edith Wharton. Why did you connect with her? What lessons can you take? What can you steal? What can you copy and then get really embarrassed and then stop copying that because it's not your style? And then you have to write, and just get better. You know, you write 2 stories and they're terrible, and the 3rd one's a little bit better, then the 4th one sucks again because you have a relapse. But you have to, like, you know, fail and learn from those failures. And, you know, you asked about my change in relationship to New York, and I was thinking about maybe I'll walk home across the Brooklyn Bridge after this, such a nice day. And I remember being a broke person writing about elevator inspectors, and to save money, I would walk to Manhattan. I was really broke, and I would look at the skyline and be really bitter and angry and be like, you can't break me. I'm still coming to Manhattan. I can't afford anything once I get there, but I'm still going. And so I think when you're starting out and you're not getting help, no one wants to read your stuff because who wants to read somebody's unedited story? You have to find your own sort of will to do it. And I think I wanted to be a writer from an early age, but it was being a failure in my late 20s that made me commit to the lifestyle and say, okay, that book was terrible, no one likes it. I'll just keep writing until it works.
Any other questions? I think we might have time for one more. Anybody wants to jump up?
Yeah, come up to the mic is probably good.
The Intuitionist is one of my favorite novels of all time. I just wanted to let everybody know that. I'm really enjoying Ray Carney's journey. It's difficult to read any crime novel set in Harlem without thinking of Chester Himes. And I just wondering if any of the Chester Himes books, some of the famous books, had an impact you or part of that whole sort of realm, or if you were consciously like, okay, I definitely got to do something very different than the imaginary Harlem that Himes is creating over there in France?
No, I mean, I think I was halfway, I read some Himes in my early 20s, and then halfway through Harlem Shuffle, I was like, okay, I gotta, address him again. And he's definitely in there, not as like in my top 10 of influences. I think the top influence is like The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 with Walter Matthau. But going, I was trying to get Harlem right in the book. Then I went to Cotton Comes to Harlem, and I was like, you're exactly right. His Harlem is concrete, but also really fantastic and abstract. And that sort of allowed me to not be so beholden to actual Harlem and have fun with it and maybe change things around. And so going back to Himes and when I was actually writing about New York, it was very liberating to just be in this wild space with these wild characters where there's actually no law at all, really, just people's sort of unleashed ids. And so he was very useful in give me a certain permission in the book. So.
One more, if anybody wants to jump up. All right, we've got one here. We've got to take her.
So you mentioning like the aspirational like furniture store as a representation for class, it reminded me of, so I actually a few years ago took AP Literature and we studied the Nickel Boys. And one thing that we would talk about constantly was how no matter what question the essay was going to throw at you, the Nickel Boys would have something for it because it was so like rich in metaphor and there was always something to like kind of take from. So I guess I was wondering, is it the objects that kind of come to you first and then you find like thematic metaphors to kind of tie into it, or do you have the larger themes first and then you choose like the objects based on those?
No, thanks. And I'm glad that was, Nickel Boys was useful. They sort of go hand in hand. I mean, when I wrote The Intuitionist, I was really just trying to figure out how to write about plot. I wrote a novel that no one liked, so I was like, a detective story with an unlikely hero, and I learned about plot. And then I decided on elevator inspectors from being in a city, like what if an elevator inspector had to solve a criminal case, haha. And then I researched elevators, like around the corner, there was a business library on Cadman Plaza, and they had a lot of stuff about the Otis Elevator Company. So I would trudge down here and take notes. It turns out without elevators, we couldn't build the modern city because no one wants to walk up there. And so it became about the city. It became about social uplift. You're rising in society. You're rising in the elevator. What elevates us? And so this very simple object, the elevator, the more I obsessed about it in a sort of sad way, the more sort of thematic and metaphorical things I could tease out of it. And I went with it when they served the story. And so I definitely start with something that's devoid of characters, a heist novel. There's no character there. And as I build out the world and I'm writing it, I'll find different resonances with different choices I make, and I go with them if they serve the story.
So I think we're going to wrap up now today. So I want to thank everybody, thank the Brooklyn Book Festival for having us, and wanted to say also that we will be signing copies of Crook Manifesto and The Stolen Coast in the back of the church. I don't know how one gets there. Everybody's going to go through here. So I've also been asked to ask you all, if you're not staying for the next event, get out of here quick because they've got to get some new people in. So thank you to Colson Whitehead. Thank you to all of you.
Thanks, Dwyer. Thank you all for coming. Thanks.